Hello everyone! Welcome to a castle building tutorial. Castles in Minecraft are so much fun to create, and there are so many different techniques for creating these. I'm going to show you my favorite way to create a castle in the game Minecraft. Let's get started with our plan. I've picked out this fairly flat area on a plains biome, and I'm going to be mapping out my castle here. Trying to work with the terrain a little bit, I decided to color code this for the tutorial. The accessory structures are going to be marked out in blue. My walls will be marked out in white. Remember when you're marking out your walls to mark out both the inside wall and the outside wall so that you know the thickness that you would like. My towers are going to be marked out in gold, and my main structures will be mapped out in red. So for my planning phase, I'm just sort of randomly putting in a couple of structures that I think would look nice together. You can play around with this quite a lot in the planning phase and figure out exactly where you want things to go. Fix things now before you build them up so that you can save yourself a little bit of time later on. Once I'm happy with the layout that I've done, I start to make things a little bit more 3D, picking out the heights that I want for each and every structure and building it up. I am doing this with worldedit to save me some time, but don't worry, if you don't have commands, this is still a very simple step. It'll just take you a little bit longer to build up each wall. If you don't have commands, please use the building block that you would like your castle to be built out of in this step instead of the fancy colorful blocks that I'm using for a tutorial. The next step is picking out the blocks that I would like to use in the castle. For me, I'm going to be going with a very gray theme. So I'm picking out all of the full blocks that I would like to use so that I don't forget any that I wanted to use and end up kind of half using them. Then I'm going to mark out the wall blocks, still going with very neutral colors. And then for a little accent or pop of color, I'm going with a blue. The next step is something that I think that I do a little bit differently. So with this castle, this is the first time that I'm building it. I didn't build it first and then rebuild it for this tutorial. I'm learning how to build it right now with you and showing you my process of that. Normally when I'm not sure exactly what details I want to do, I take a smaller section of my build and I kind of fully detail that out. That gives me a better vision and idea of what the entire castle is going to look like without having to actually do the entire castle and then realize that I don't actually like it. That's always really unfortunate when that happens. So that's what I'm doing right now with this corner tower. It's one of the smaller towers in the area, but it's going to have a very similar design to the rest of the palace. So I'm building up that top tower part shape and then of course giving it a nice sturdy foundation and working out what details that I'm going to want to see throughout the rest of the castle. This really helps to keep me organized and get my thoughts together early on. I hope it helps you too. We're going to start with the foundation. I don't want to overcomplicate anything here at all. We are only using full blocks here. I'm alternating between the polished andesite and the stone brick. I'm going around each building and adding a nice, thick, and sturdy foundation all the way down to the terrain, varying the height as I go along. It doesn't matter how high this is exactly, do it as high as you would like it for your castle. For me, I'm kind of working into the terrain. It's lower in some spots, higher in others, but usually somewhere between 2 and 5 blocks tall. Remember when you're mapping in your foundation to not only go around to each of your exterior structures, but to also get the interior of those. That'll make it a lot more consistent throughout the entire castle rather than just the outside and then have to do it all over again on the inside. That's something that I sometimes forget, so I thought I would mention it just in case. Now that the foundations are in place, once again, going in with some of those full blocks, we're going to be marking out our walls. So I'm adding pillars to each and every one, spaced evenly, but they're going to be different on each wall. So space out your pillars according to the size of your wall. Don't use any stairs or slabs here, overcomplicated. We'll get onto that soon. Let's just mark everything in how we want it first. This will help you to organize your details a little bit later on and get a good idea of what you want without rushing into it. Now that that's done, we can finally focus on doing a little bit of detail. So I'm grabbing some of my more complicated blocks into my inventory and I'm adding some shape to this wall. Firstly, marking everything in finally with those full blocks, adding in some chiseled and some stone slab blocks, then adding in some more stairs and slabs to give those classic castle crenulation looks. I think these walls ended up looking very sturdy and they definitely match with the theme that I wanted to go for. And plus, there is lots of depth in this. I do this same pattern on each and every wall, but I'm not going to show you me doing every single wall in this castle. You get the idea. But I will show you what I did for this trickier diagonal wall. You'll notice my walls aren't all exactly perfectly identical, but they all at least match each other, which makes the castle have a nice flow. Now that that's done, let's focus on the gatehouse. Once again, I do already know how I'm going to detail this because I did that other tower on the other side. I'm going to try to match this, but it's not going to be perfectly symmetrical. I really like doing these asymmetrical entrances. I think they add a lot of character and charm to a castle. So for this one, I'm going with a flatter roof shape, some simple pillars, a window, and then I'm going to be marking out my gates, kind of matching it to that normal wall pattern and adding in a gate, of course. Now, we're going to be doing the same thing on each of our structures, starting with the main ones. No stairs and slabs yet. I'm marking in my foundation, my pillars, and then mapping out the roof shape that I want. I can go in with details later on, but I need to get these buildings looking structurally sound before I do that. So I mark all of my pillars, get my roof shape in, and then I can go in with details. Let's go around and do that to every single main structure first. So, foundation, and then pillars, and then map in the shape of the roof. You don't have to worry about finishing anything or making anything perfect right now. Just get it all marked in so that you know what you're doing when you come back in with your details. This will help you organize your thoughts a lot better and not rush into it. If you detail too much early on, then you might get confused or not be able to put your roof in properly or not have things scaled the way that you wanted them or go way too over detailed on one tower and not enough on the other. It's better to do things a little bit more evenly, in my opinion. You'll notice that I'm also varying the pillar blocks that I'm using here. In some I am using stone brick, in some I am using cobble, and in some I am using oak wood. I'm trying to vary this throughout the entire castle just to add a little bit of variety and change things up a bit. Don't forget to also do the foundations and pillars on your inside walls as well. Sometimes these can be different or the same as the outside wall depending on your function that you would like your castle to serve. Now that I've got this done, let's take a little 360 look at the castle so far. So we have the corner tower that is completely detailed. All of our walls are completely detailed and everything else has a foundation and pillars ready to go for us to start marking in the roofs and getting that detail done. Let's start on that now. So I don't want to do any more wall details until I know exactly where my roofs are going to go. That's the next important step for me. So I'm starting with these big towers next to our biggest main structure. I'm going to be mirroring the shape of these towers with that entrance tower to keep things fairly consistent. Once that's done, we come back to this other main structure. I usually focus on getting the main structures done first and then I work on the accessory structures. Once again, just marking in a simple roof. None of the roofs on this tower are super peaked, they're all fairly low and some of them are even completely flat, but I think that adds to the castle feel a little bit more. This tower here is our biggest and tallest tower. For this one, I am going with a rounder peaked roof shape just to add some variety. And then finally going over to a more simple tower. With this one, I decided because we already had so many of those peaking roofs, for this one I would go a little bit simple and just do some typical castle crenulations. And then, of course, for our final accessory structure, this needs a roof as well. For this one, I decided to layer it a little bit and add sort of a house shape up on top. You can use this technique to add some more variety to your shapes and layer in some depth to your structures. I decided not to overcomplicate things here, but that is an option if you would like to. Now let's finally start in on our detailing. I'm grabbing my slabs and stairs finally and starting to mark in some details. Sort of just randomly mapping them out and changing them around as I feel is fit. You'll notice not all my details on every structure are exactly the same, but they all tend to match each other fairly well. I'm doing all of the accessory structures details first, and you'll notice I do a very thick border around the top of each of these structures. I think that really gives that sturdy castle feel. Even though this is more of a fantasy project and it wouldn't be super functional for defending, I like the look that it gives. It's a nice aesthetic. So if you're going for something that needs to be a little bit more functional, maybe look up some real medieval castles in real life and see what types of details they used that you could add to your design. You can see that I change up the details from cobble to wood here. I find that my structures, when I do this, tend to be a little bit more on the gray side, so whenever I can, I try to switch out the details to be wooden instead. Now let's switch our attention to the next accessory structure. This one is sort of between a lot of our main structures, and it's more of a connector. So I put a big entranceway there that I assume would enter into a corridor and allow us to walk around. Then on the side, I'm just going to build a simple little staircase so that we can get up onto this next layer. I like adding lots of staircases to the exterior. I think it adds better functionality and defensibility. Again, if that's what you're going for. Now, focusing finally on our big main structure. This one's actually very easy to detail. I just did some very simple slab curves going along the top and some big windows. Anytime you get an opportunity to add big windows, it's sort of like lazy wall detailing in a way. It definitely lets you off the hook in terms of the amount of detailing that you have to do. I also decided to thicken the details on the roof to differentiate the wood from the cobble details and just add a little bit of depth there. Then, turning my attention to the front, I'm going to be adding a nice circle window and an entrance into this main hall from the top of our second gate. Now that we are finally finished up the first main structure details, let's head over to the next structure. This one's going to have a lot more of a defensible look. I decided to not go with a sloping roof on this one, and that actually caused me to struggle with it quite a bit. It's a little bit hard to figure out how to detail crenulations in an interesting way because I didn't want to leave it as just a plain old rectangle. I probably could have done this one as a diagonal building to have it be a little bit more interesting. But I think it turned out fine the way it is, and I managed to make the details work. They look very thick and sturdy and defensible, which is exactly what I was going for with this edition. Now moving on to our last main structure. This one has a little bit of both, so it's got one of those sloping roofs. I'm going to be doing a smaller window up here. Remember, for these structures that are on the outside part of the wall, it depends on if you want your castle to look very defensive or not, what type of window you do. So you can do smaller windows that are almost more like arrow slits, or you can do big fancy windows if this is more of an aesthetic castle and it's not actually going to be defending anything. You should change your details depending on what the function is. Form fits function, as they say. That tends to make things look a little bit more realistic if that is the look that you are going for. Once I've got that side wall finished, I'm going to move over to the sort of balcony-like structure that's over here, add some simple crenulations. You'll notice I leave a lot of my exterior walls fairly blank. I'm a big believer in leaving some simplicity in things. I don't think everything needs to be covered in slabs and stairs. Now, moving on to the tower details. Finally, these are my favorite part. I really love detailing towers, although it does get a bit challenging sometimes. For these, I'm going to be simply filling in the roofs, and then I'm pretty much going to mirror what we did for that entrance tower, except a little bit more simple, because these are more tall, so I don't want to just cover them in details. I want them to match their surroundings a little bit, so I add a big fancy window and some thicker foundations. And now we're going to be turning our attention back to that simple tower that I talked about earlier, adding in the final little details and pillars to it, and of course some small windows. This is one of the more simple towers, but it definitely breaks up the pattern that we have going, and I think it definitely adds a lot, even though it is more simple. Now turning our attention to our largest tower, where we're going to be mirroring that detail once again. I'm throwing in some walls to kind of transition that thick border that we've got going along the top down into the narrower part of the tower so that it doesn't look too top heavy with the big roof on it. Then I outline the roof in some stone and I focus on a flag. I love adding flags to my castles. I think they look so much more official with them on, and if you play around with the shape enough, you should be able to get it look like it's flowing with the wind. Make sure that all of your flags and banners are flying in the same direction when you do this. Speaking of flags and banners, let's add another one to this tower roof. We initially ignored this. I go ahead and fill it in now and add a smaller flag to the top of it. Now that all of our exterior details are complete, let's turn our attention to the inside of the walls, where I'm just going to be making things a little bit more functional, adding a stairway so that we can get up and fight on the top of that wall, and some borders going along so we don't fall off. You can do sort of whatever you need in here, varying it. Now it's finally time for me to change out my colors. Of course, if you were not building with worldedit, then you wouldn't need to do this step, but here is what my castle looks like when I get rid of those tutorial colors for you. Now it is time for the finishing touches. Let's start off with getting some windows in. I'm sure you don't need a tutorial on doing windows, so I'm just going to quickly gloss over this. I'm adding bars on the outside ones and then glass panes on the inside structures. And with these details in place, our castle is complete. Thank you so much for sticking by and watching this tutorial. I hope it was helpful, and I really hope I got my point across and was able to explain how I build castles in the game Minecraft. Remember, there's no right or wrong way to build a castle. You do what works for you. Practice and be patient. I'm sure you can do it. Bye-bye, everyone!